Hello and welcome to Revenge of the Drive-In, the podcast where we watch, review, and discuss 2 movies randomly selected from a list of over 2,000. This podcast is brought to you by the Grandma Sophia's Podcast Network, and this week we are discussing Martin, George A. Romero's masterpiece of a vampire film, as well as The Alligator People. I am your host, Patrick, and I am joined here by...
My name is Kevin. I'm the special guest co-host for today.
Yeah, we've had you before. We did the Quatermass Experiment and Bride of the Monster. So you are, for one reason or another, you are our go-to for 50s schlock sci-fi horror. Although this time we're at least doing a movie that's different than that, too.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you choose everything randomly, like Bride of the Monster and Quatermass Experiment, at least were made in like the same decade.
Yeah.
And the same genre.
Yeah.
This is a wild comparison.
Yeah, every now and then we get one of those, and it's more likely to be a pairing like this. But yeah, my favorite was we did Friday the 13th Part 3 and The Prowler together, and those movies might as well be the same damn thing.
I know, that's a perfect lineup right there. But yeah, it makes total sense to me. I'm a big fan of complete randomness. I considered lately, and this was just my brain going crazy during thesis mode, I should just do a TikTok series where I claim I'm going to try to review every single movie ever made and just get a random number generator on Letterboxd and see what comes up. I tried it, and it was like, I didn't film anything, but I looked at it, and it was like, I kept getting like DVD special features.
I didn't know they had those on Letterboxd.
Yeah, I got like a 1940s or 1930s Mexican film that has no subtitles online, and that was the only one I was able to find.
Yeah, you almost have to narrow it down to at least stuff that is, available and also watchable in your language. Which, by the way, to transition, Martin is a film that is barely available for whatever reason. I don't know what happened.
Really?
It's the polar opposite of Night of the Living Dead, George Romero's other film, which is the most widely available film ever because it fell into public domain. It's probably the most famous public domain movie, at least that I can think of. And Martin, it's on Tubi, actually. I didn't discover that until recently, but otherwise, it's like nowhere to be found. I think it's not available on DVD in the US unless you get it as an import, and it's like, I don't know what the hell happened. It's just, it's unfortunate, too, because it's a great movie.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think this is part of the reason why I'm so intrigued by, like, George A. Romero's career between Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead, because there are all these little spots where you'd think after Night of the Living Dead becoming such a sensation, he would have more work and have like a reputation of some kind. But instead,
they tried to make him make like porno movies.
I know, because he had no other option.
Season of the Witch was supposed to be a porno movie, and he insisted that it not be that.
I did not know that Martin was so unavailable. I mean, it was released by Libra Films, and they released a number of films that are like much more readily available than this. Like, they released Eraserhead, they released The Crazies, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened with this one. I only saw it for the first time last year, and I didn't even know where my professor had it.
If I'm not mistaken, Dawn of the Dead went through something kind of similar to this, where for a while it wasn't commercially available. But at least with Dawn of the Dead, it had gotten such a wide DVD release that you were still able to find it. I know I found it at a used DVD store before I knew that was like not easily attainable, and then now I think Dawn of the Dead it's in print and stuff. I don't think Martin is in the US. It's very strange.
I didn't even know it was on Tubi either, because I had a feeling that there was a copy on YouTube in good quality, and there was. It's in 1080p on YouTube, so regardless of official circulation, some kind of has uploaded it, for everyone to watch, and it's good quality, good quality for such a
this movie is not good quality itself. It's an excellent film, but I was actually wondering about this. I had this thought early on in the film when I'm watching it, when Martin and Colonel Sanders are wandering around Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And imagine going to a movie theater to see a new release, and the movie looks like this.
I don't know really where this movie played.
That's a good point, too. I've seen three different years listed as the year this movie was released. I've seen 76, 77, and 78. Seems like 77 is the most accurate. I don't know where the 76 comes from, and I think the 78, maybe it's possible this movie got a little bit of a wider release after Dawn of the Dead, maybe, or something, because this was kind of just George Romero's little movie before Dawn of the Dead, but
yeah,
it did play at Cannes, I want to say.
Yeah, I pulled up, I think 76, the date is most likely like when they shot it, and with such like a platform release, it's tough to pin down a specific year. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I was curious about it when you brought it up. I pulled up the release date info page on IMDb, which of course could all be wildly incorrect.
Yeah, who knows?
They have it listed as in after the May screening at Cannes in 1977. They have Austin in October 77. They have DC in May 78. They have LA in December 78. So my guess is that it probably just never
78. Yeah,
maybe. I mean, my guess is that it just probably never got a wide, huge release, and they just put it in different territories based on whoever wanted to buy it. Stuff like that is tricky, and I've run into that problem a lot when I've been like writing scholarly, like academic pieces on exploitation films, because it's always required with like MLA formatting and stuff to put the year that a movie was released in.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But it's impossible to tell with stuff like this. But the reason I bring up like what theater this played in is because I could imagine with theaters that are known for playing much cheaper films, like that an audience might be used to this kind of look.
Sure.
But even so, like the color, like I think I read that he wanted to shoot it in black and white, and the studio made him put it in color.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
But the color is so washed out here and ugly to look at, except for the blood. Like the blood is the only thing that pops.
I was going to say the blood actually looks good. The blood looks better than it does in Dawn of the Dead. The Dawn of the Dead blood, it looks like a bit like the Italian movies of the era, of the Dario Argento movies and stuff, where the blood just isn't the right shade. It just looks way too off. Here, I think the blood looks pretty good, and it's Tom Savini doing the effects, just like with Dawn of the Dead, of course. He appears in this film as well as he appears in Dawn of the Dead.
I think part of the reason the blood looks better might also be just because, like, the contrast between the washed out, like, ugly look of the rest of the film and the bright red of the blood here, it is, like, more eye-catching than Dawn of the Dead, where it's, like, it's all shot on 35 millimeter. Dawn of the Dead was 35 millimeter, right?
I think so. I mean, that Dawn of the Dead looks like a real movie, I guess, for lack of a better way to phrase it. The Amusement Park, which is the lost George Romero film that recently got a release. It stars the guy who plays Cuda in this movie. That was like a weird, like, I think that was made for like a Lutheran church or something, and it was like deemed too disturbing to like release or something, because I don't think it was supposed to be a horror movie, but he kind of made it like a psychological nightmare.
I love that movie, by the way.
It's great. It is great, but that I'm going to draw comparisons from kind of the look of that movie to the look of this movie. Like, this looks like something that's not a professional production. It looks like something just some guy made in his backyard kind of thing, which is sort of what it is, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what it is, but also that vibe, that like fits the movie's vibe so well.
Exactly. This is such a depressing movie, but I don't mean that as a bad thing. I think that's actually one of the movie's strengths. It's just a sad, melancholic movie.
Yeah, it is. It's so bleak. Just so bleak. And like every time I've seen it twice now, and every time, like, or both times I should say, when it starts out, it feels slower. It feels like, I mean, we'll maybe hopefully we'll pick up the pace soon. And by the end, it has such a massive impact without ever really changing like the tone or the pace of the film that you can't imagine it working any other way.
That's a really good way to put it, yeah. And, we'll obviously have a lot more to say about it, but let's jump into the plot here.
Yeah.
My name is Martin. I'm 84 years old. People think I'm crazy when I tell them how old I am. I'd like to be normal. I just have a sickness. The only way I can survive is by drinking blood.
We start with Martin played by John Amplas, boarding a train from Indianapolis to Pittsburgh. This actually reminded me of the movie Carnival of Souls, which, Kevin, I'm sure you've probably seen.
Oh, yeah.
Because it just kind of starts in the middle of a shot, seemingly. It doesn't feel like the start of a movie. It's just like, oh, we're starting. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's also a great comparison because it does, both of them feel it like, someone who's making industrial films, making like a low-key horror film.
Absolutely, yeah. But yeah, so Martin boards the train. I don't want to say catches the eye of a woman who also boards the train, but he certainly is interested in this one woman.
She catches his eye.
And at night, he just prepares like a needle and eventually just breaks into her cabin. As he does so, he like imagines... Romero does this thing where you mentioned the black and white. He was supposed to, or he wanted to shoot this movie in black and white. He still utilizes the black and white in these like but like imagination sequences. And this is Martin kind of imagining this woman being welcoming to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he has this like brief moment of like, oh, this is what it's going to be like. And then when we cut back to reality, she's not in the cabin, and it's because she's in the bathroom or something. It's just like this real like stark contrast to what he had been imagining. But when she gets out of the bathroom, he jumps on top of her, injects her with whatever's in the needle, which he insists it's just to make her sleep. And then there's like a struggle. She's like swearing at him, and then eventually she does fall asleep, and he takes off her clothes and has sex with her unconscious body, and later on slits her arm. He opens up her arm and lets the blood kind of pour down onto his naked body, and then he eventually starts drinking it out of her arm.
Yeah.
Because Martin is a vampire, although, as we learn in the film, he is not your traditional vampire in any way. And that's kind of what those black and white sequences are really about, because they don't look like full Victorian because they just didn't have the budget to pull off that look. But with the women in the nightgowns and the candles, like I assume that's what they're going for.
Yeah, that's what well, I think it's like you're talking about the fantasy sequences, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like, it's really hard to tell because sometimes like they feel like they could be flashbacks, but other times...
Yes, sometimes they are, I think. Yeah, that's worth noting.
But it does really feel like in his head he's playing out fantasies of a vampire, and not fantasies of like the kind of thing you would want, but fantasies of just a typical vampire lore, vampire legend. Mm-hmm. He's very much against like, the idea of like there is no magic in the world. There's no such thing as like the classic kind of vampire. But when he says it almost sounds resentful. Maybe because, and this is just one element that I noticed, he really does not want to do any of this. Like, and that really comes through in his performance, which is incredible. And part of the thing that gets me over all of the sequences of him drinking people's blood is that he's not good at this. No. He's not good at in every single scene something goes wrong, and he is so upset that things are going wrong. He can't because he has this vision in his head of what's supposed to happen in this scene and how this will go over well, and then it gets completely screwed up, and he feels weak as a result. And all he wants, I thought early on that I thought about comparing him to the old kind of vampires where they can hypnotize people and then they have very willing participants to to drink their blood, and he does not have that. And then later on in the radio,
well, that's partially why he puts them to sleep before he has sex with them, because
exactly
that's his way of, it's not consent, but that's his way of at least not getting slapped in the face while it happens, right?
Now, the sex thing, though, it does remain unclear as to what he actually does with them, right? Because does he ever actually say that he does have sex with them? Because they never show it. They both, he strips them down and he gets naked as well, but you never see him, you never see anything explicit.
No, I understand what you mean, but there's a scene with the one who he doesn't end up killing, the one he just puts to sleep, where he's fondling her breasts and stuff. But that is a fair thing to say, because I hate to get into it, but if you have sex with someone and then murder them, there's a lot of your DNA there, you know?
Yeah.
We know he doesn't even really know what condoms are. He has a line later on where he's like, I should have worn one of those things or whatever. Like, his views of sex or whatever, because he sounds like a child when he talks about it. He's very... It's weird to say this because he's having sex with unconscious women, but he's like weirdly innocent about this stuff. He's very shy, and the way he talks about it is like a child talking about it. When he talks on the radio, he refers to it as the sexy stuff. Yeah. And he's like, I'm too shy to have the sexy stuff with anyone who's awake. And, you know, one thing that I think is fascinating about this movie is this is the opening scene, right? We see our anti-hero have sex with an unconscious woman and then slit her throat and drink her blood. Right. And yet he ends up being sympathetic throughout the film to a large degree. And I think it's interesting. The film is very much aware of what it's doing with the sexual aspect of it. Like, the film doesn't shy away from how creepy and disturbing and messed up this is. Right. You know, there's a lot of cheap-ass horror movies out there where it's just the woman's naked because we can get nudity in the movie and it'll sell more. No, the movie's trying to do something with this nudity, with this sexual aspect, to communicate about the character and all of its themes and stuff in the movie, and I think that's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think part of, like, I think when you bring up that Martin is sympathetic, I think that makes the scenes where he attacks these women or these people in general, when it comes to, you know, the two homeless men that he attacks and the guy that
the boyfriend,
the boyfriend in the that ends up in the one house. I think, like, the fact that he's sympathetic, like, Romero knows to amp up the creepiness of these attack scenes because they're so intense, and he knows that, like, by the fact that we have, like, sympathized with him to a degree up to this point makes those scenes more disturbing. And then
I agree with that.
Yeah, and it also, I think that's part of the reason why they make the film so that Martin doesn't fully want to. It seems like Martin does not want to be doing much of this. Like, he's complaining about the feeling he's getting, the feeling anxious and jittery, and that he needs a fix. I mean, frankly, he's more of a drug addict than anything else.
Yeah. And which is, it's interesting that they use the needles too. It's like this film, when he pulls those needles out and, you know, it's this ugly 70s looking, that, like, you're like, oh, this is like a drug movie. And it's not, but in some ways it kind of is. You could say it's a metaphor for that, but yeah, he definitely plays the character like he's just addicted to something.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a full metaphor, like if it's a metaphor that can, like, sustain a whole movie. So I'm glad that it's more just, like, hinted at, and there's all this idea of, like, drug iconography and the way that Martin behaves and is sort of outcast by some people and others take pity on him and stuff like that. It all feels very real and reminiscent of other drug films, much more so than any other vampire film that came before this. I don't, like, nowadays we have the Jim Jarmusch film, Only Lovers Left Alive, that feels very much like a successor to this in a lot of ways.
Okay. I haven't seen that one.
There is very much a sense of, like, it's not meant to be like a strictly a horror film and focused on thrills. It's just about, like, people who have this, like, problem. They're addicted to blood and they need to get it some way, somehow. A lot of the same types of themes that this movie plays on. But before Martin, I cannot think of any vampire movie that deals so much with vibes and mood than this one does, because in most of them, vampires are still romantic in some way, whether it's the old Bela Lugosi films or the Christopher Lee Hammer films that take place in the incredible gothic settings. I don't know, like, no one else was really experimenting with vampires and with genre in this way, except for maybe Ganja and Hess from 73, 74.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Which I just realized right now. So
okay, yeah, that's not a bad comparison.
Yeah, so Martin is just like its own little beast that really only has one other comparison that was barely released when it came out. So
no one saw Ganja and Hess. Although, interestingly enough, It's the George Romero connection. Dwayne Jones,
right, of course,
star of Night of the Living Dead, is in that. I think it's the only other movie he was in. I think he was just in the 2 movies.
That's like the Michael Cimino of low-budget regional horror films. Not Michael Cimino, sorry. Oh my god, that was such a stupid thing to say. John Cazale.
John Cazale. Yeah, I think I knew what you meant, but yeah, John Cazale.
Yeah, Dwayne Jones is the John Cazale of regional horror 70s cinema.
There you go. And that's going to transition to where we are moving in this film, because I love the regional aspect of this, that this movie is shot in the Pittsburgh area, which George Romero's from Pittsburgh. He got his start working with Mr. Rogers, who's also from Pittsburgh. So Martin gets off the train in Pittsburgh. He meets Kuda, who is this old man who looks like Colonel Sanders. He's dressed like him too. And he's played by the actor from the Amusement Park. I think those are his only 2 movies too, this guy.
Lincoln Mazel. What a great actor too. Just based on those 2 things, I want to see more stuff with him in it.
I haven't seen the Amusement Park in a while. Do you remember him having an accent like this in that movie?
No,
is this acting?
That's
what I thought.
Completely put on for this movie. He does have almost like a transatlantic accent. Like he has an acting voice, I think. But this movie, it's like very much a put on.
That's what I thought, but it's like a good, consistent accent, whatever it is. He's supposed to be from somewhere in Europe.
Yeah, I think they say it, but I can't remember.
Yeah, he's an old-fashioned guy, and we first meet him, and it's like, okay, who is this? Is this Martin's grandfather or something? They barely talk to each other. In fact, Martin doesn't say anything for quite a while, but he takes him to another train, so they walk across town, they get on another train, and take it to the dumpiest looking suburb you have ever seen in your life. It's this like industrial, like rundown, almost ghost town. It's just like dogs are roaming the street free, junkyards, the most depressing looking place you've ever seen in the world. It looks like a third world country or something, and this is just a suburb of Pittsburgh. It's actually, I think the name is Bradford.
Oh yeah, something along those lines. Braddock,
Braddock. Yeah, this is actually, interestingly enough, Braddock's been in the news kind of recently because the new senator, the junior senator for Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, was the mayor of Braddock, and before he was lieutenant governor of the state. And Braddock is apparently, I guess it's kind of like, if you've seen, like Roger and Me or something, it's kind of like, maybe it's a bit like Flint, Michigan, where it was like this industrial town that was relatively booming in its day, and it just lost all of its industry, and it's just like this depressing place to live, I guess. So I'm looking at the Wikipedia page. The population is 1,721 in the 2020 census, a 91.8% decline since its peak of almost 21,000 in 1920.
Jesus.
That's like unfathomable to me. Like this. I mean, there's a few lines from the Tom Savini, the character that he plays, about how like there's no work here, and it feels so authentic. This seems like a town that if you were a young guy or gal growing up here, you would just want to get the hell away from it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge theme between the Kuda's daughter or niece or something in the film. Granddaughter, yeah. Yeah, that's
Christina.
A huge theme throughout the movie. It's just people wanting to escape all this, escape this whole town. And it's
Christina, played by Christine Forrest, who married George Romero a few years after this. And I was going to say they remained married. No, they divorced in 2010. What the hell? That was like a couple of years before George Romero died. You couldn't just wait it out?
Odd. Well, I was surprised, and I found this out after I looked up, after I saw the Amusement Park. I looked up Lincoln Mazel, the man who plays Kuda in this film, because he's already incredibly old. Like, the plot of both Amusement Park and Martin hinge on him being a very old man. And he just died in 2009.
Wow. He was over 100 years old then?
106.
Jeez.
What a guy.
He almost lived long enough to finally see the Amusement Park released, I mean, in the grand scheme of things. Because that was released, in 2019, 2020?
Yeah, so about 10 years after he died. Insane that, you could star in a film that becomes, like, quote-unquote lost when you're already in your 70s, and you could live to see it, like, almost 50 years later. But yeah, the setting of Braddock, it's like, it is, I think that really adds to the film's sense of melancholy and just the bleakness of everything.
100%.
Because it is
yeah.
not, like this is not a place that you go for intense thrills. This is not a setting that conjures up dread and horror. It's a setting that conjures up depression.
Yeah.
And that's like the overarching
depression and tiredness. It just feels like a tired town.
Those scenes where he's just like wandering around, especially the scene towards the end with the parade, it just feels like the mood. The movie is great. I rarely would like watch it multiple times because it is so like oppressive almost in its tone. But really, really great movie. I think that mood really adds to it and makes it what it is.
So when they arrive at Kuda's home, Kuda shows Martin to his room and gives him some ground rules. First of all, he says he identifies him as a vampire, Nosferatu, and he says that I'm going to save your soul and then I'm going to kill you. And this is like the first. Martin still hasn't said anything to this guy, and you see all this garlic like hanging up over like every door and stuff. There's statues of Mary all over the house, crucifixes, crosses. And the ground rules that Kuda lays out. Kuda, by the way, is a last name.
Right,
which
yeah.
It's strange because he introduced himself as just his last name. These two are cousins, by the way, if I haven't said that. But then his granddaughter always acknowledges him by both his first and last name, which is weird. But Tata Kuda is his name, which is
Tata Kuda? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Tata.
Tata.
Yeah, it's just a fun name, but yeah, so the ground rules are when you take a victim, don't take them from in town here, go to the city, and also don't talk to my granddaughter. Or is it that my granddaughter will not talk to you even if you talk to her?
There's something like that. Basically,
either way, they end up talking to each other.
Yeah,
but the granddaughter is the one who starts it.
Yeah, exactly. Like Martin does not go out of his way to talk to almost anybody in the film, but because the granddaughter speaks to him first and tries to reach out to him as a friend, Martin thinks it's someone that he can talk to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is the first instance of Martin kind of the theme in the movie or recurring theme is Martin explaining to Kuda that there's no real magic. He like grabs the crucifix. He's like, listen, this doesn't hurt me. He takes a bite out of the garlic. None of this stuff is all magic in the movies. That's not what it's like here. That's not what it's like in the real world.
Him and Kuda, their relationship throughout the film is like wonderful because you get the sense, and I know this is all just the actors doing this, you get the sense they really hate each other. Like they Martin can't stand Kuda. Kuda is
well, everyone hates Kuda in this movie pretty much.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
kind of. I mean, everyone except the elderly people who shop at his grocery store or whatever, right? Because anyone who's like kind of young, like Father George Romero is like laughing at him, and I mean, he doesn't hate him, but
yeah, I love that.
Christine certainly is not
Christina,
living with him.
Tom Savini's character, I think it's just because Kuda represents like everything old, like everything that led to this town and the people in it being the way that they are. Like he represents the old guard that is keeping, the younger people from actually doing anything or like making anything of what's going on here. And it's why Kuda is obsessed with mythology. He's obsessed with Martin being this mythological, monstrous creature who, rather than like trying to make any attempts to understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. He's definitely the antagonist, but not just to Martin, to just like, to so many people in the town, because it represents kind of a backwards way of thinking.
Yeah, and the first interaction he has, or Kuda has, with the Tom Savini character, who is Arthur, Christina's boyfriend. He says something about how there's like no work in this town or something. And Kuda's like, there's plenty of work, and then Arthur's like, no, you don't understand, like work that can actually elevate you or what. I don't remember exactly what he says, and that to me is like so relevant to the world today because, when was the last time you were at a restaurant and there like wasn't like a waiter or waitress shortage, right? Like you see it all the time now.
Yeah.
And then if you're around certain people, maybe not Kuda's age, but generally kind of older people, they'll all say like, oh, no one wants to work anymore. And
yeah,
like,
I mean, that's been going around for centuries now, it feels like.
Yeah, and it's like, it's not that, though. It's like, you can't make like a good living doing these kinds of jobs that there are shortages in.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even just a matter of like, there is certainly a matter of good living with the minimum wage just remaining stagnant. But it also is a very young person thing to be working in a job that, you know, has a small, like, doesn't pay you very much, but also doesn't provide much, like, internal satisfaction. Like, you're not satisfied with your life and what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And that always seems like a very young person worry, obviously, with, like, staff shortages and, like, fast food chains and everything. People always talk about that and about how we need more service industry workers. But even before the pandemic, and this started to become more widespread because people realized that, like, they wanted more out of, like, what life was offering them. I remember having that same issue with certain jobs that I worked in my early to mid 20s. And I thought, like, certainly I had to be doing something more important than this. Because when you're young, it's like you have to, you define yourself by, like, what you spend, like, every hour of your day doing. And spending so much time on work. And hell, I mean, I'm still going through it sometimes with why I'm in grad school, because I wanted to find something that's more, like, satisfying for me. Because spending all your days just doing like a service industry job or something small like what Kuda's thinking of in these scenes just does not fulfill you in any meaningful way.
Yeah, we see what he actually has Martin do. Martin delivers meat from his grocery store, butcher shop, whatever it is, to bored and lonely housewives or elderly women, and he does so on foot. This seems like just the most miserable job in the world, and he doesn't
even have a bike or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like he probably could get a bike if he wanted, but still, and he's walking through the most depressing looking town. This does not seem like a fulfilling job in any way, really.
Absolutely. I mean, like, my heart goes out to George Romero. I know he lived in Pittsburgh, not actually here, but to be around this, like, he captures it so well. Just the, you know, said it a million times already, just the depression of everything. And I forgot about the housewife aspect of it, where it's like all these bored, lonely, bitter housewives who sometimes just use Martin as a vehicle to just unload all their frustrations on. It's a brilliant idea to just put a vampire in the middle of all this.
It is, yeah.
People don't understand what's wrong. They think that I'm a monster. They think I'm a vampire.
And so Martin, as I said, he works this job for Kuda. He also begins to kind of make friends with Christina. Christina, when she meets Martin, already knows what Kuda says that he is, and eventually she has a confrontation with Kuda about how, you know, he's not a vampire, he's just, like, sick, and he needs help, like, he's not actually, like, he doesn't have fangs, and then that's where Kuda goes in this whole thing. It's like, I guess it happens... It's like a curse in his family, according to him. It's just every now and then someone's born and they're a vampire or something. It's not really clear. Yeah. But he insists that Martin's actually like 80-some years old. Your mother believed in this. And she's like, well, big deal. My mom's dead. She died before I even knew her.
Doesn't Martin also claim to be 84 years old?
He does say that at one time, but it's almost like he says that to Christina, and I'm not 100% sure if that's... I mean, he does say that, and he is being honest, but I also, when he says it to Christina, I almost think he's just, like, kind of mocking the situation, too. I don't know how... If she's taking that as actual confirmation.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt she believes it either, because, you know, she just sees him as someone who's sick and needs, like mental help.
Yeah, and he's a young guy, or young-looking guy, anyways. So Martin, as he's doing his little delivery, his food delivery, he meets Abby, who is this incredibly lonely, bored housewife who he doesn't say anything to her. She offers to drive him back to town. If you didn't know about Pittsburgh is incredibly hilly too. So she drives him back to town. She stops and gets gas and is just talking to Martin, basically how much her husband sucks and how she knows he cheats on her all the time, and she's only putting $1 worth of gas in the tank because she's like, I know he drives off and goes and cheats on me, so I'm not giving him any more money than I have to for that. Although, keep in mind, $1 worth of gas back then was pretty close to a full tank, I think.
She has to, like, monitor, like, the mileage on it in general, partly because, well, I know that, you know, she does think that he cheats on her, but also, like, he wants her to know about her. Like, he's controlling her, even though, you know, he's going off and doing his own thing. I'm wondering about Martin. There's a scene. She asked Martin to get a notebook out of the glove compartment for her to jot down the mileage. And I could be wrong. And if I am wrong, you can just edit this out. But isn't there also, like, a contraceptive sponge and, like, a vibrator in the same, like,
I don't know about a vibrator, but I definitely saw Tampax.
The Tampax are there, too. But
I noticed the Tampax. I didn't notice the others. You might be right.
Well, if it's a vibrator, it's a very ugly looking one, like a very 70s.
Yeah, well, I was going to say it's the 70s. We'll get to it. It's the 70s. This movie features the ugliest 70s interior decoration you will ever see in your entire life in that one home invasion scene.
Oh, God.
That is the most depressing, disgusting house. It's a beautiful house from the outside, but...
Yeah. Do you want to get into that then? That home invasion?
Yeah. So that is one of the best scenes in any horror film, I think. So Martin, he's scouring for his next victim. He finds this housewife who he wants to break into their home. He waits until the husband is away on a trip, and he knows he's away. He actually goes and gets the same, like, remote control garage opener that the husband had, so he can just, like, break in easily. And then when he actually gets into the house, he gets into the bedroom after he's prepared the needle and everything. And then he's surprised that this wife is with some boyfriend who kind of looks like John Voight.
I never put that together, but yeah.
I always thought this looked like John Voight. But yeah, and he kind of freaks out, but acting quickly, he ends up stabbing that guy with the needle, injecting him with, you know, whatever sleeping drug, and then he runs off. And the wife and boyfriend are, like, arguing about, he's like, I don't know what just happened, but he stabbed me with some drug. You better call the cops but she insists, like, we can't call anyone because no one can know you were here. But he's eventually like, listen, this could be life or death. You need to call someone. So she goes and gets on the phone, gets the number for the hospital, and is going to call the hospital. But then Martin picks up another line in the basement or the game room or whatever and keeps interfering with the phone and just, like, typing in numbers when she's trying to type in numbers. And for some reason, they do, like, sci-fi sound effects when he taps the phone numbers. I don't understand why that is. Oh,
yeah.
Is that supposed to be the sound effect of the phone? It's almost musical, whatever it is. It's just very strange. It's a weird touch.
Yeah, I actually don't really know why that was the case. I assumed that it was supposed to be the sound that the phone was making, so I just
but it doesn't. I don't think any phone on Earth has ever sounded like that. But yes,
good point.
I think it's really just to get home that he's hitting buttons. I think, but I don't know. It's strange. But the scene, as we have both said, is just incredible. The editing in it's just so perfect. It's so precise, cutting back and forth between this woman on the phone screaming and crying because she keeps forgetting the phone number, shirtless John Voight screaming and becoming increasingly panicked, and then Martin just hanging out with the phone with the needle, like, hanging out of his mouth. And they eventually figure out that someone else is on the phone, and she tells the boyfriend that there's the phone in the game room, so he goes down to, like, look for it, and then Martin ends up locking him outside.
Yeah.
And then Martin goes back to the woman, and I think at this point he injects her with the same drug, but then also the boyfriend gets back inside, and there's a bit more of a struggle.
Yeah, I mean, Martin has multiple needles, so, like...
Yeah, he does.
So he does end up drugging both people. And I will say, while the boyfriend's outside, Romero uses the house so well because there's all these...
There's a lot of glass.
Yeah, a lot of glass, a lot of windows, so the boyfriend can see everything, and you can see him getting increasingly panicked as Martin is running through the house, and he can watch the whole thing, and it adds a whole other element to the scene that's really interesting.
Yeah, and then when the boyfriend's back inside, he eventually collapses, And Martin goes up to the wife as she's just getting back to the phone. And then he just puts her to sleep, and he says something like, I only wanted you. The boyfriend wasn't supposed to be here. And he's like, you'll be all right. All you'll do, you'll go to sleep and you'll wake back up. And we see that he means just this, because he ends up only killing the boyfriend because he just needs some blood.
Yeah, which is great that they do that exact same reasoning in the first scene, where he tells the victim on the train that she's just going to go to sleep too, because in this scene we still think that Martin could just be lying, just like he did with the woman on the train. But instead, that's what he said. He means what he says this time, and he goes to the boyfriend.
Yeah, so he ends up stabbing the boyfriend in the neck with like a tree branch, which is classic Tom Savini stuff, where you can tell it's just someone lying down in like a bed of leaves and with a fake neck. And then he drinks that blood and he goes back inside the house, presumably again has sex, or at least nakedly cuddles with this other woman, and then showers and leaves her be. So that's a big thing. He always has to clean up. I guess he cleans up himself with the shower and everything, but he also cleans up the entire house to make it look like nothing happened.
Yeah.
And while this is happening, we hear him talking on the radio with some local radio DJ who has like an overnight 6 to 6 show. He's calling in and telling him about like his struggles. He's really just wanting to talk to somebody because he's so lonely. And this radio guy calls him the Count. And at one point, like, he's fascinated by this conversation. Martin is telling him about how it's nothing like the movies, this being a vampire. It's just like all this stuff. Women never want this. No one's ever a willing participant. So I just kind of have to do what I have to do. I've gotten really good about cleaning up, though, and making it, so that no one can track me down. But then he also says, when they go to a commercial break, the radio DJ says, like, hey, Count, this is really great stuff. I would love to meet you in person. And then that's when Martin hangs up.
Yeah, I think that the radio DJ is interesting because, when he's on the radio, he kind of treats it as a joke, but you do hear the genuine DJ, interest. You do hear the genuine interest in his voice when he's talking to Martin off the phone or off the air.
Yeah, he's classic radio DJs. Like, you get like a ridiculous caller calling in, and you think it's stupid, but you got to keep going because it's interesting, and listeners like it. So the phone lines are ringing off the hook with people calling in for questions for the Count and everything.
Yeah. If there's anything that I could imagine I would want differently, which is it's not my favorite way to look at a movie. I don't always think if I was director, I'd do this. But the scenes with the radio DJ add such a neat dimension to it, but it doesn't even show up to halfway or a little bit more than halfway through. I almost want more of it throughout, in the beginning of the film too. But I understand.
Yeah, because there's a few reasons for that. One, the radio show is established early on. Also, at the time, again, Kuda, old-fashioned guy, they don't even have a phone in the house. Christina really wants a phone.
Yeah.
And she talks to Martin about, hey, getting another line can't be that much more expensive. We can split the cost for it. And eventually they get a phone, I guess, obviously, because Martin's making these calls. We never see when that happens. But
he asked Christina for one at one point. I can't.
Does he? Okay.
I think it's implied that Christina gets him one.
Why can't he buy it himself?
I don't even know if he's making money off of his job. I wouldn't be.
That's I guess true. Well, no, he does get paid because at least he makes tips.
That's true.
Because when he delivers the meat, the women tip him as well as giving him money for the actual food. So yeah, you're right. I don't know if Kuda pays him. I don't know if he has a salary.
I wouldn't be surprised if Kuda took those tips from him either.
Well, but then he does do the odd jobs for Abby, and Abby, I'm sure, pays him. So he reconnects with Abby when they go to church, and this is a fascinating old church. It's like a burnt down. They say the church was burnt down. Abby offered to pay him to do other work around the house. He didn't say anything to her, but now at this point he decides to take her up on that offer. So he's helping fix her door, and she starts showing affection towards him, and this scares him, and he kind of runs off.
He doesn't fully know what to do with someone who actually wants him in a real way, especially sexual way.
Yeah, and you say real way, but like, it's also not really that genuine on Abby's side. Like, it's genuine, but it's like driven out of just her loneliness and boredom, I think, more than anything.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, she refers to him, she compares him to like an old alley cat that she used to have, which would just stare at her with these wide eyes, and she could just talk to it openly and not get judged. And she even says some like kind of demeaning things to him that she doesn't mean to be demeaning, but she's like, "That's what's great about having you around, Martin. You don't have opinions."
When I say, like, you know, like, Abby does not want him in any sense of, like, she doesn't want to understand Martin in any way. Right. But she does show him a level of desire that we are supposed to understand he's never had before, like, ever. Like, no one.
Yeah, never anything consensual, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So he just, like, he runs off first. And then...
Yeah, he even tells the radio DJ over the phone, he's like, "I've never done the sexy stuff with women who are awake. I'm too shy for that."
Exactly, which is absolutely insane. Just an insane thing to say and to put in a movie.
It's an insane thing to say. It's also, the guy's what, 85 years old? Not once? So Martin eventually does go back to Abby's house, and he flatly says to her, he's like, "You keep inviting me over because you want to have sex with me, right?" And he's like, "Well, that's good. I've never..." I don't know if he says I've never... I'm sure he doesn't say I've never had sex with an awake woman to her, but he's like, "No, if I'm going to do this with someone, I'd like it to be with you." So they have sex, and then afterwards, Abby is crying, and Martin thinks it has something to do with what he did, even though she says, no, it's not. And then she talks, I don't really know why she's crying. She does talk about how she can't have kids. I don't think that's necessarily why she was crying just now. I think she's just crying because she's lonely and depressed.
I think it almost feels like a situation where she's upset at where her life is. It's like, when you want something to take the edge off, like, you know, a harmless fling, like with this young kid here, you hope that would help something, or you could get some enjoyment out of it. And I always assume that she starts crying here because she realizes
it wasn't what she was hoping for.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't solve anything and just makes her
exactly. Although she does continue to see him because they have a nice little picnic later.
Yeah, where she's also very depressed.
Well, she is, yeah, but the picnic was kind of strange because she had like a line or two implying that she knew he was a vampire, when I don't think we ever see him explain things to her, but apparently he does at some point, because she says something like, "You're not going to believe this, but I actually want what you have," or something. And he's like, "Oh, there's nothing exciting about what I have. It's not like the movies." And it's like, okay, so I guess she knows he's a vampire.
Interesting. I didn't even catch that line.
And then there's also a great scene when Kuda invites Father Martin over for supper. Father Martin, of course, played by George Romero, who you might not recognize without the Coke bottle glasses. But
I didn't at first. He almost looks like Tom Savini.
Kuda is speaking with Martin. Martin is like a relatively new priest to the community, and Kuda basically invites him over because he wants to confirm that Father Martin has his same beliefs and stuff. And he's asking him, like, "Do you believe in demons and all this crap?" George Romero flat out, like, laughs at him. And he's, like, trying to be polite. And he's like, "Oh, you know, you should talk to Father Zalimas. Like, he believes in that stuff." But he's like, "I don't think I do." And then Kuda feels, like, insulted because now his local priest, you know, doesn't even reflect the views of the community, when in reality I don't think it's the views of the community, it's just his views.
Yeah, really. Absolutely. Well, I mean, that happens sometimes. People just like get so wrapped up in their own views that they think that other people have to think the same way, and they can't fathom anyone, you know, thinking differently.
Exactly. And then so Kuda eventually invites over Father Zalimas, and they perform like an exorcism of some kind on Martin, who eventually just runs off. And then he does this thing when Kuda goes outside to meet him, where he mocks Kuda by scaring him. He's wearing like a Dracula cape and those like fake teeth that you get at a Halloween Express or whatever. He just does that to mock him. He's like, "It's just a costume. This is all stupid." Yeah,
because Kuda doesn't even like play up being scared. He does seem scared at first, and then he starts to realize Martin is just fucking with him. and is like, and just seems upset at him, calling him the devil again and everything. And like I said, I just love the scenes between the two of them because they have such an interesting dynamic where they hate each other, they're messing with each other. Cuda genuinely wants to kill him. Martin is just happy to mess with him the whole movie.
He also said, I didn't say this earlier, but Cuda, when he was laying out his ground rules, he's like, you never take someone from the town, and if you do, I will kill you without salvation.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's key to remember.
Although, I don't know how real... I mean, it's important to Cuda. It's really not important to Martin, because I don't think he believes that he can be saved, you know? Like, if I die, I die. Like, it's not really... It doesn't matter if you bless me or damn me before you kill me.
Well, I don't think Martin wants to die either. I think that's the key.
No, that's true.
It's like when he says, I'll kill you without salvation. It's not like Martin is like, really afraid that he'll go to hell this time. It's more just like living is better than dying, all things considered.
Sure.
So that's the way that I always took that, and that's why he does. We should mention about the home invasion scene. That woman is in like Pittsburgh, in a completely different town. So he does still kill people, but they are outside of Braddock.
So Martin, on the phone with the radio DJ, talks about how he's kind of struggling to find, who his next victim will be. He says he no longer really wants to have sex with these unconscious women, so he's like being more picky about who he chooses because he's not that attracted to any of them now that he's having actual consensual sex, I guess. Eventually, he kills a couple, or at least one homeless guy in an alley and drinks his blood. And then, because it's just in an alley, previously what he's been doing is he's always showered and stuff and cleaned up. But he can't do that here, so he breaks into a store to get a change of clothes. And that's when the police show up and they chase him. And they chase him, I guess he ends up in like a crack house or something, some kind of drug
something along
thing.
Those lines. That is not specified at all, but I think they're credited as like drug pushers or something.
He inadvertently, Martin starts a shootout between the police and these like drug dealer guys or whatever, drug users at least, and so like a couple people get killed.
Yeah, and he gets a chance to escape.
Yeah, Martin escapes unscathed. Also, one of these drug pusher guys. This name doesn't mean anything to me. Kevin, it might mean something to you, but one of these guys is played by Tony Bubba.
That only means something to me because when I saw his name also in the credits as the sound
clicked on it. Okay. He's a filmmaker of some kind who apparently made a lot of documentaries about Braddock and how depressing it was and like kind of how it was affected by the loss of all of its jobs and stuff like that. He also apparently appears in Dawn of the Dead. I couldn't tell you who he is in that. He could just be a zombie.
Looking at some of this stuff, I'm really curious to see some of it. Just looking at the images and stuff like that.
Okay.
I think the scenes at Cuda's house were actually Tony Bubba's.
Oh no way! I just googled who he is in Dawn of the Dead. He plays like the Mexican guy who, for no reason, puts his arm in one of those blood pressure things during the middle of a zombie attack. He plays that character.
Oh, that's hilarious.
It's my favorite character in Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, I think they filmed the scenes at Cuda's house at his mom's or his grandmother's house. So that's the other thing.
At Tony Bubba's mom's or grandmother's?
Yeah,
okay.
Tony Bubba's grandmother's place, I think. Which goes to, it's perfect because the house is decorated like a really old person lives there.
So he escapes from this shootout with the police. And then at one point he goes to visit Abby at her house and finds that she's killed herself in the bathtub. And she's done so with a razor blade, which, if I haven't said, that's Martin's method of choice for slitting people's arms. So we hear him talking to the radio DJ, and he's like, "I didn't do this one. Like, this wasn't me. She just killed herself." Mm-hmm. Oh, and I should also say that Christina eventually leaves town because she's going to leave with Arthur, who wants to just get out of town, find a job somewhere. And she even says something like, again, this is just such a sad movie. She's like, I know we're not going to make it. This relationship isn't going to last, but he's just my way out of here. I just need to get out of Braddock, away from Cuda. And it's like, oh, that's just depressing. And then she insists she won't forget about Martin. She'll reach out to him. She'll write him and let him know where she is, but she never does that. So that just kind of makes Martin more depressed.
Well, I don't know if she never does that, or if the movie almost
He just didn't
before.
wait long enough.
Yeah, exactly, or something like that. Because I feel like I think that Martin is just absolutely convinced that she won't write. And then,
yeah, that's true.
Based on what happens at the end, she never will write to him. But
right.
Yeah, I do think that maybe it's just me having faith in people. But I just get the sense that the more important thing is that Martin is fully convinced she's going to forget about him. And that was like the only person who really reached out to him almost as a friend. And then Abby's the only person who showed like any interest or desire in him, whether it was actually like real based on him or whatever. Mm-hmm. And now she's gone too.
Yeah, both of these women have left him.
Exactly. So you have that great scene of him walking through the parade, just like empty feeling. It just feels so for the only instance of like liveliness that the town has shown so far, it's still an incredibly bleak scene. To have Martin just walking into the parade and walking through with it.
Well, and it's just like he is just like walking along with the parade. It's like he doesn't belong there.
Yeah.
It's just strange looking just to see this parade, these people like enjoying themselves. He's just like moping.
Which I heard that was improvised. Like they were filming at the house and they heard the parade was going nearby. So
yeah, that's what I would have guessed. I didn't know that specifically.
Great.
Sure.
I love trivia like that.
Yeah, classic independent filmmaking. Mm-hmm. Yes, so the movie ends kind of abruptly when Kuda just wakes up Martin and says, like, I told you never to take any women from in town. Do you think I believe that Abby, or Mrs. whoever, that she killed herself? And then he just stabs a stake through Martin's torso. We see this shot from adjacent to the bed where you can tell that they're just pounding the stake in kind of next to his body, but it still looks kind of cool, and there's blood. And then they cut back to the shot of Martin lying dead in the bed, and that actually looks amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's effective too because the blood like really spurts up like high into the room.
Yeah,
pretty shocking compared to the other blood that we've seen so far because there's a lot of there's movement to it. It's not just like it's not just like Martin slits open someone and the blood just sort of falls down. Mm-hmm. It's especially in its abruptness, like you said. It's so surprising.
Super abrupt. It just happens. I actually didn't remember the movie ending quite this way, but as we see Kuda burying we never see him burying the body, but we see that he's like gardening over this patch of dirt, presumably where Martin is buried. As he's doing all this, we hear the radio, and it's the radio DJ, saying, hey, Count, if you're out there, people would love to hear you. And you hear all these people like calling in and speculating on what happened to the Count and stuff. And someone's like talking about like what they think he looks like. And then all this stuff. And the very last thing we hear is just some guy saying, I think my friend is the Count.
You hear it over Kuda putting rice over Martin's grave.
Is it rice?
Yeah, I think it's rice. I don't know what the meaning of that is, but I don't know the full mythology.
Well, maybe Martin just got married.
I swear that's what it is. It seems very. I saw it like
I thought it was just seeds.
Maybe, but he doesn't. Does he pour dirt over on top of it though? I don't know. I'll take a look at it again.
But yeah.
Cut all this out if we go back and look at it and you find...
Kuda's getting into that urban farming lifestyle now.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyways, that is Martin. Kevin, what did you think of it?
I love it. It takes a while for me to fully get on its wavelength because it is very oppressive at first, but it is incredibly made. And the cumulative impact of everything is wonderful. So I really like it. What are your thoughts on the movie?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. When you say incredibly made, I think it, we kind of joked about the movie looks like absolute shit, but that's part of the charm, part of it. But it's incredibly well made, and just the performances are really great. John Amplas is fantastic. And then Kuda, he's incredible too. I talked about that accent. I had to think, does he have an accent in the amusement park? Because this seems so authentic.
Yeah, it is. But it's not a cartoon, even though it's an Eastern European, Slovenian accent, whatever, that comes from that vampire mythology. It does feel very real. It's not a cartoon in any way. I really love the amusement park just because I love that connection between it trying to be an educational film and trying to be a film that's about elder abuse and how we should respect the elderly and try not to like push them out of the way and, you know, make a world that's unlivable for them. But it's so nightmarish.
Meanwhile, it's the most disturbing film ever made. Just about.
I know.
But, you know, it's funny. Do you ever see what's that unauthorized Disney movie? Is that Escape from Tomorrow or something like that?
Oh, yeah. I've never seen that one.
Okay. That movie kind of sucks. And the amusement park was like 100% what that movie kind of tried to do.
Yeah.
Even though, coincidentally, I'm sure whoever made that wasn't even aware of the amusement park because it wasn't released at the time.
Well, I don't think anyone had found it. I don't think it had even been, like, discovered.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, I maybe, like, a George Romero biographer would have known about it. But
yeah, I mean, I've seen a fair number of George Romero films. I haven't seen his entire filmography, but the amusement park was what scared me the most of everything. And he's done some scary stuff.
That's because that's the one that's not outwardly, anyways, a horror movie.
Or it's not even meant to, or it's not meant to be. Yeah. It's meant to be educational. It's meant to be like a social film where you learn about how we should be better towards the elderly. But instead, it is just a complete nightmare. So, but
did you ever see There's Always Vanilla?
No, I haven't.
That looks like, well, I was going to say, that looks like the one movie I haven't seen by him. But no, I didn't see, he did a lot more movies kind of later in his career that I wasn't even aware of, like Bruiser, The Dark Half. And then eventually he was just Zombie Guy. Those are the only movies he could make. Oh, executive producer on the Crazies remake. Good for him. Congrats. I actually like that, the remake of that movie. I like that more than the original even.
But I need to see that one. I remember when it came out. But that was like the midst of like a glut of tons of remakes. Like even when they
also a glut of zombies too. And the Crazies, at least the original, the Crazies isn't really a zombie thing. I think the remake kind of was. I could be wrong though.
The last thing about Martin that I was surprised to find out, apparently the original cut was 2 hours and 45 minutes.
I was going to comment on that, yeah.
Yeah, well, a couple years ago, the thing I didn't know is that someone found that version, and they're restoring it right now.
I think so it hasn't been released, but okay, so that...
No, not yet, as far as I know.
Maybe we'll finally get Martin, in some capacity, released in the U.S., and maybe it'll only be the 2 hours and 45-minute one. Maybe that one will be released in black and white. I'd be curious about that.
Just very curious to see it, and very curious to see what was cut from the film, because it moves at a very leisurely, almost lyrical pace throughout the thing.
Yes.
Like, there's so many times in the conversation where we were like, I don't know if they actually show that, or if that's like what it is, but I guess that's the case.
Yeah. I'm assuming in that cut, we will at least establish when Martin tells Abby that he's a vampire.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there will probably be more to the Arthur Kuda discussion when they're at the bar, because that whatever comes of that discussion, he apparently he tells him about the vampire stuff, and then because I think he's about to tell Arthur, it's like, hey, you shouldn't, Christina shouldn't have children.
Yeah. Because
one of them could end up being a vampire, but he doesn't get to saying all of that. So, but yeah, otherwise I'd be curious to, I don't know what that would be like. I'm hoping for more aimless wandering around Pittsburgh and Braddock because I like the looks of all those scenes, how depressing they are.
Absolutely. It's almost like slow cinema at that point.
But yeah, Martin is really a masterpiece. I think it's probably my favorite vampire movie. Vampires don't tend to be my favorite things in horror. Mm-hmm. But this is certainly like a unique take on it, or at least unique when the movie came out, and it's fascinating because it really blends. I even though he's a vampire, I really wouldn't call it a supernatural horror movie in any way. It's a psychological movie.
Yeah, very much so.
And Martin as a character is fascinating, and how what the movie does with him. The first thing we see him do is have sex with an unconscious woman and then kill her, and somehow Romero and John Amplas with his performance are able to make him sympathetic after that, and it's kind of amazing that they're able to do that when they set him up in that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love I mentioned the performances. John Amplas is great. Lincoln Mazel or whatever, fantastic as Kuda, and I really love the woman who plays Abby, Elaine Nadeau she's fantastic as just like, she's so believable as this just like depressed woman. Like at the end of it, it's not surprising that she kills herself because she just seems so.
Yeah, she's really great. You know, she's wonderful at portraying that. So, changing gears almost entirely. Well, not entirely, because we are kind of still dealing with horror. Just a very different type of horror movie. Very different type of vibe from Martin.
Still low budget.
Still low budget, yeah.
You know, for the time, this would have been a higher budgeted movie than Martin. I mean, relative to its contemporaries. This
is, like, a more expensive film. I think you can tell from the fact that, like, a lot of the movie does take place on sets, as opposed to Martin, which has very claustrophobic cinematography. But yeah, we're talking about The Alligator People from 1959. This is a part of a series of very low-budget, black and white science fiction horror films shot for Fox by the producer Robert L. Lippert, who's I kind of want, maybe this is just me, but I feel like he's been forgotten compared to so many other B-movie producers.
I was not familiar with him. I don't think I had ever heard of him. Yeah, so he's not like a Roger Corman or William Castle, certainly.
No, but he made almost the same amount of movies as those guys. He produced, like,
interesting,
well over 100. How many films is he actually credited with? His Wikipedia is insane, because if you go to his Wikipedia page, it is divided up between all the different companies and sub-companies that he worked under not worked under, but, like, owned throughout the years. He's credited with only 52 films producing on IMDb, but that's not even counting all the other films that his company just made over the years under his supervision. So if you look at his Wikipedia page, it has, I've not gone through and counted, but it has to be hundreds. I know some of the ones you might know.
Looks like it, yeah.
Lost Continent, the movie from Mystery Science Theater.
Okay.
I think he might have also done King Dinosaur, too. The first Roger Corman film, actually, was for Robert Lippert, Monster from the Ocean Floor.
Okay. Oh, Rocket Ship XM? That's a Mystery Science Theater.
Yeah, Rocket Ship XM, Radar Secret Service. That's kind of how I knew about him, was because his name popped up on a number of different Mystery Science Theater movies. But he also gave people like Sam Fuller their first start. He produced Sam Fuller's first 3 movies, I Shot Jesse James, Baron of Arizona, and The Great Steel Helmet. His most well-known, so a lot of B movies, in case you couldn't tell. His most well-known movie, though, was The Fly from 1958. Also done under a deal for Fox, but shot in color.
Beautiful color. That is a beautiful movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't really know the level of his involvement in it. I think Robert Lippert, for me, has always been one of those guys who's like, this is definitely a subject for further research. Like, he has so many different kinds of films. He had his fingers in so many different parts of film history, but none of them, like, stick out or are as punchy in the same way of, like, a Roger Corman type.
So The Fly is a movie that we've covered on this podcast. I enjoy that movie quite a bit. And The Fly, it's interesting because that's not really a B movie. You know, it's a little schlocky and it's dated because it's a, 50s sci-fi, but it's in color. It has, like, real actors in it. It's like a real professional, well-made movie. But, well, now, when I went to purchase The Alligator People on DVD, I found on Amazon a collection of 4 films, studio classics of 75 years of 20th Century Fox. This is clearly a Canadian DVD release because it's got everything in English and French, like the
oh, yeah, I know those.
In the background. But the 4 films are, really making me question the use of the word classics here. But there's The Alligator People, The Cabinet of Caligari, which I guess is a remake of the classic silent movie.
Yeah, it was an early 60s one, I think.
And then, the 62, and then The Fly, and then House of the Damned, which I also don't think I've ever heard of. So, yeah, I bought this for The Alligator People, but, I love The Fly, so I'll watch that movie, and I'll have to check out the other 2, I guess.
Yeah, and House of the Damned, which I'm looking it up right now just because it's Maury Dexter. I think it has to be another Fox. Yeah, it is another Robert Lippert production.
I assume these all are, once you mentioned that The Fly was, which I wouldn't have known that was, but yeah, I assume they're probably all.
Well, The Fly is a very professional-looking movie. It's a very like colorful and memorable movie. And you said so it's not quite a B picture the way you described it. The Alligator People is a for sure B film because it was produced to play on a double bill as the B picture to Return of the Fly.
Which I was going to say, Return of the Fly itself is a B movie. That's like, you take everything nuanced about the original Fly and get rid of all of it. Return of the Fly is just a schlocky monster movie, at least as far as I know. I don't think I've ever seen it.
That's what I was going to say. I haven't seen it, so I'd
or
like
maybe
to...
it's Curse of the Fly, because there's another sequel. I know there's a famous scene, famous. There's a scene with someone running around the woods in a fly mask, and he has to stop and like adjust the mask on his head, and then just made it into the movie.
Well,
I've seen that scene.
Well, speaking of running through the woods with a mask on your head, we'll have to get to that. Soon. So I think overall, like when people talk about the Alligator People, they talk about Robert L. Lippert, but this is also the last film of director Roy Del Ruth. And I was wondering, watching this, if you'd ever seen any of his other stuff before, because this is one of those guys who's just a studio guy, probably made like dozens of movies, multiple a year. Have you seen anything from him before?
I don't think so, but the name was familiar, and I'm looking up his like filmography. There's a lot of movies I've heard of. It looks like he made a lot of like musicals and stuff in the
comedies,
30s and 40s.
Yeah, comedies, some nice little fun movies.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen them, but boy, it's a long way down from Broadway Melody of 1938 to The Alligator People, I guess. But,
I know, that's what I was thinking. It's like there are a couple movies of his I've seen, which are It Happened on Fifth Avenue, which is a great underrated Christmas movie, and Blonde Crazy, a pre-code James Cagney, I think Joan Blondell film.
Oh, he made the original. I actually don't think it's the original because I think there was a silent version, but he made the 1931 Maltese Falcon.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. He's arguably most famous for that. He's most famous for making the version of a well-known movie that people don't know because they're more familiar with the 40s version.
Right.
But he's also the one that I've seen clips from, and I very much want to sit down and watch the whole thing one day, is the Babe Ruth story from 1948.
Oh, no, I have seen that one. It's terrible.
Oh, yeah.
It's so bad. Did he do that? Oh,
yeah, he directed that, too.
That's like because I'm a big baseball fan. I was a big Yankees fan. You know, I grew up hearing about Babe Ruth and you know, Lou Gehrig and all this stuff. And, you know, you have The Pride of the Yankees, a great baseball, sports, New York Yankees biopic that Babe Ruth actually appears in, and that's a fantastic movie. Gary Cooper, you know, and then the Babe Ruth story comes out a few years later. I think it came out in 48. That's the same year Babe Ruth died. I don't know if it was made before or after he died, though. And that's like famously like the worst. I've seen that referred to as like the worst sports movie ever made, and it's like, yeah, it was pretty awful, but it was fun as like a terrible B movie kind of thing. I want to say they got like some things shockingly wrong in it, and I don't mean like the history, because you know I was just watching Blonde. You can just make anything up for like a biopic, right? But
yeah,
I want to say maybe Babe Ruth is right-handed in that movie or something. They got like and Babe Ruth was famously left-handed, or there's like some things that are like shockingly wrong in that movie. I can't remember them specifically.
I mean, this is a movie where like Babe Ruth cures a kid's cancer just by being
well, I mean, Lou Gehrig kind of does that in Pride of the Yankees, but it was done with a bit more class.
A bit more taste.
Yeah, because he does kind of cure a kid. Or he promises to hit 2 home runs for a kid in the World Series. He meets the kid 20 years later when he's an adult or whatever, you know.
Well, I wouldn't say that was like Roy Del Ruth, like towards the end of like to like becoming a bad director, because a year before he made It Happened on Fifth Avenue. So I think like Babe Ruth's story is just one of those things that like was just really rushed out on like at a B movie studio. I think it was Allied Artists or Associated.
It probably was. Hey, Babe Ruth's got cancer. He's going to die soon. Let's slap together a movie. It probably was that.
Yeah, and I think he actually lived for 6 months afterwards because he was so inspired by what a great portrait of his life they put together.
But the movie couldn't cure his throat cancer, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, you know. So he worked for a few years, just continued to work in B movies, not having the same type of studio backing he did in the 30s and early into the 40s. Then he started to do TV shows, it looks like. 1959, returns to the big screen after 5 years with the Alligator People, which actually also, last note I'll make about the crew, Carl Struess is the cinematographer here, who worked on films like F.W. Murnau's Sunrise and Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator.
Okay, I was going to say, I knew that name when you mentioned it. I had heard of him. The original Ben-Hur also?
Yeah, the original Ben-Hur, Island of Lost Souls, the Frederick March, Dr. Jekyll and Mr.
Dr.
Hyde.
Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, yeah. Island of Lost Souls, that's a great one. Yeah, this guy's very accomplished.
Yeah, the movie is just...
Gone with the Wind. We didn't mention Gone with the Wind, the most famous film ever made.
Who knows how many different people worked on that movie?
That's true.
6 directors.
That's true.
So just overall, an absolutely stacked cast of people making a B movie, pretty much.
Making the Alligator People.
Yeah, making a movie
the title
that's called
is,
The Alligator
is amazing.
People. So let's get into the story.
Inside this strange, forbidding plantation, on the edge of the death-laden bayous, there is a horror beyond belief. A scientist turns his cobalt rays on the revolting, scaly monarchs of the swamps to transform men into hideous, living gargoyles, whose faces must be forever hidden from human sight.
There's a framing device here, and I'll be interested to
Kind
hear
of like The Fly. The Fly has a similar kind of framing device.
These two psychiatrists are talking. They're very bland, just like immediately forgettable psychiatrists. And they bring in a nurse that they're going to give a sodium pentothal to, which I think is meant to be like an early sort of truth serum or drug.
Something like that.
All it does is pretty much like hypnotize her. It feels like she'll be passed out for most of the movie and recalling like repressed memories when she went by a different name. You know, she's Jane Marvin in these framing scenes, but throughout most of the film, her name is Joyce Webster. So we start to go into flashbacks, and Joyce, the first scene we see is Joyce leaving for her honeymoon with her new husband, Paul. And on the train, they seem to be very much in love, very happy young people. And Paul gets a telegram that he has to leave to make a phone call. And when he leaves, he vanishes, like Joyce does not see him again. And we don't know anything about where he went. Joyce doesn't know anything. And eventually she finds an address. There was an address I think he used when he was registering at college.
When he went to LSU, I think he was probably.
Oh, they actually say it's LSU?
I think so. He was probably classmates with NBA Hall of Famer Bob Pettit, who went to LSU at some point in the 50s, maybe 40s. So.
Has to be the exact guy. Well, he actually appears in the film at some point, right?
Bob Pettit? What?
No, I'm kidding.
So who is this actress? You said you're like very familiar with her, right?
Beverly Garland. Well, I'm not
Okay.
very, very familiar with her.
Okay.
But she was, because she was on a lot of TV. But
My Three Sons with Fred McMurray.
Yeah. But in between TV shows, she was in a lot of early Roger Corman films and made a name for herself as being sort of like a very talented actress who was also kind of no nonsense. There's a lot of great stories of her memories of the sets and making these really low budget movies. It conquered the world. When she saw the little monster in that thing, her first response was, "Oh, that conquered the world?" She was known for having like a very, very good at like portraying these ridiculous scenarios with a sort of sense of strength, not just being like a super passive like female lead. And she kind of has that in this film too. But yeah, she sort of just mostly stuck to TV after the Roger Corman films, had some small roles here and there in other things like Stark Fear, which I've never seen, but I know it's also a very low budget B movie from the 60s. I think the first thing I ever saw her in was she was in an episode of Friends in the 90s.
Oh, wow.
The poker episode where she plays the old woman who teaches them how to play poker. So Paul vanishes, her husband vanishes, and the movie skips over several months in these flashbacks where she says she never heard a word from him and decides to track him down to the address that he used to go to college. And this address is this plantation or mansion somewhere deep in the bayou in Louisiana. And she decides to track it down because there's a delivery being taken to this address and shows up at the train station. The delivery, in a scene I thought was hilarious, is just a box labeled like radioactive cobalt, highly radioactive, that she just like sits on while waiting at the train station. Who comes to pick it up but Lon Chaney Jr.?
One-handed.
A one-handed launch. Yeah, I don't know if you see it in the opening scene, but when he starts driving,
I
you see he has a hook for a hand.
Yeah.
Lon Chaney in this movie, like, Indestructible Man a few years before was like an incredibly depressing film, incredibly depressing performance. He seems to have no energy, and I'm just like, oh, that's just Lon Chaney Jr., the last decade of his life. Probably doesn't have like, that much energy as he's like acting these days. In this film, he gives a wild performance.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to say something about it. So Lon Chaney Jr., I love the guy because, I will forever love him for the Wolfman, if nothing else. But, Universal tried to make him into a star, obviously, because of his father. He was the one who kind of got the Universal monsters rolling. So, like, Lon Chaney Jr., he's a legacy. We can make this guy a star. Lon Chaney Jr., with the exception of the Wolfman, was a terrible leading man. He should have been a character actor. If you see him in like High Noon, and Of Mice and Men, he should have been a character actor. And he was kind of thrust into stardom because Universal wanted to capitalize on his name. And I think he really only works as a star in The Wolfman. And he's so much better as a character actor. I love him in this movie. He's doing like a pretty awesome like Cajun accent kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he's just this like bitter old man who hates alligators because he got his hand bitten off by one of them, and this is just an awesome performance. I really liked him.
Yeah, that's the thing. He's so angry all the time, and like kind of like, and not like a bitter like depressive angry. He's over the top. He is like he's like frothing rage.
Also, was this the inspiration for the Carl Weathers character in Happy Gilmore?
It better be. I would love to I would love to contact people, because the tragic backstory of Lon Chaney's character, I don't even know if they say his name. I have it here that his name is Manon. He hates alligators. They took his hand at one point. Now he has a hook for a hand, and he will take the opportunity to kill any alligator he can, including one scene on the way back to the house when Joyce arrives in Louisiana. He just goes out of the way to run one over.
I was going to say, did they actually run over an alligator? Because they cut right before the car would go over it, but they also cut when the car is still moving and it's so close to the alligator that I can't imagine they didn't run it over. They go back to after that they have a shot, and she's like, oh, you didn't have to do that. That alligator didn't mean any harm. And then he's like, didn't mean any harm, did he? And he holds up his hook. And then they show a shot of the alligator like scurrying away, but that could be a different alligator. They might have just run one over. I don't know.
It's possible. It's one of those things where it's like you genuinely have no clue unless someone came forward and said, yeah, we just murdered a bunch of alligators on this film.
Yeah. This is before Heaven's Gate. This is before the No Animals Were Harmed in the making of this film era.
I would have to go back and look at
before even the Amazon cannibal films from Italy, where they're killing dozens of animals per movie.
I'd have to go back and look at the shot again, because it could also just be a rear projection. It could just be a rear projection of a car in front of an alligator.
You're right. There's ways it could have been something else. They could have shot it in reverse, although probably not, because I think the alligator's moving, and you can't get out.
But it was also just a very cheap film, so who knows whether or not they actually...
Yeah, exactly. I think they ran over an alligator, unfortunately.
Well, for everyone listening, you don't actually see the alligator run over. So
that's true.
So it's not because
tasteful cutaway.
They cut away, and yeah, you're right. I don't think his character actually does run it over, but he tries to. But even if he didn't run it over, within 15 minutes, night falls at the plantation, and he's just out there with a revolver just firing into the pond, trying to hit alligators all night. And I'm just imagining at that point, the keeper of the house has told him to not do this while Joyce is in the house, while they have a guest. And the conversation is just like, he must do this every night. Just go out with a revolver and bullets and try to see how many alligators he can kill.
Yeah.
So when Manon, I'm just going to call him Lon Chaney because they never hardly ever refer to him as name, and it's just Lon Chaney. When he goes to pick up the cobalt, the box of radiation they've all been exposed to, Joyce is there at the train station and demands to be taken back to go to this house and get answers as to where her new husband went. So she goes back to the house and runs into the keeper of the house, who for a lot of the movie I feel like is doing like a Mrs. Danvers from Rebecca. Lavinia Hawthorne, who was the wife of the person who ran the plantation, and now she kind of does. It's a little bit odd because it's hard to really describe. So it's not the same last name as Paul, whose name is Paul Webster. And at first, Lavinia tries to pretend that they've never heard of a Paul. They don't know what she's talking about. They don't know why she got that address, but there's no other train leaving until tomorrow, so I guess you have to spend the night here.
Classic kind of like old dark house setup.
Yeah, but with someone like Carl Struz behind the camera, it's not quite as moody for an old dark house as you would think. There's a lot of like tacky wallpaper.
No, listen, yeah.
Including in the
James Whale would have pulled it off better, sure.
Absolutely. I honestly think this was like one of the last movies most of the people who worked on this film made. I think after this, they kind of just retired. Almost Roy Del Ruth's last film. Carl Struz doesn't seem to have any real credits beyond this. At least those two. It's odd that they didn't make much after this. So it's like, after the Alligator People, it's like, well, I've said everything I need to say.
Yeah.
I have fulfilled my artistic vision.
Of course.
Now I can
Or maybe
it
was guilt over possibly running over an alligator, a live alligator.
Could be.
Lon Chaney as the hook-armed, hate-maddened Cajun.
I'll kill you, alligator man! Just like I'd kill any four-legged gator.
So that night, a local doctor comes to, or not a local
He refers to himself as the swamp doctor. Just sounds so funny when he's like, I'm the swamp doctor. This is my swamp buggy to get around. And it's like, what? Why is he talking like that?
Actually, no, maybe I'm not thinking of the swamp doctor. Like, there's a scientist who essentially lives and works on the plantation, right? And you don't fully know what he's up to. But when he meets up with Lavinia? God, I always forget that name because I've never heard it before in my life. When the scientist who seems to work at the house, but you don't quite know what he's doing, meets up with Lavinia and says, like, you know, is questioning this new woman who's staying there, they do make a hint that they both know who Paul is, and they're wondering why this woman is there.
Lavinia, by the way, is you've never heard of that name. It's the name of Titus Andronicus's daughter, the one who gets raped and gets her hands cut off, and yeah, just like an alligator bit off her hands, and that and yeah, that's the only time I've come across Lavinia, I think, but yeah,
a very literary film.
Exit pursued by alligator.
Yeah. That night also, Joyce hears a piano being played in the house, and the sound seems like recognizable. So she goes down to investigate it, and whoever was playing the piano runs away.
I like the really dark lighting here, because it looks like there's something mysterious looking about this guy. He's in like a trench coat.
Yeah, those are the times when it really does feel like the old dark, the traditional like old dark house narrative. Because at nighttime, the house really is like suffused with this very moody lighting.
My favorite bit about this part, though, so he opens the door when he sees that it's her. The piano player scurries away and runs out the window. But then when she goes to look at the footprints, you see the footprints are all like 6 inches apart. It makes it look like he just like what was he doing? It's like the faster you run, the further apart your footprints are. It just looks so funny. It looks like he was like daintily walking away.
You can tell that those are just footprints, like someone casually walking across the set left, like right before.
But even more so than casually, like a casual walk has a longer step than that. This was just like someone deliberately walking as taking as small steps as possible. It looked very funny to me.
That's funny. I didn't even notice those. So yeah, I might need your help because I can't exactly remember when we find out who that guy is. So I'm trying to go through this chronologically.
I think it's when Lavinia confronts him, like out in the woods or something.
Was that the same night though, or was that the next day?
it might be that it's probably the next day.
Yeah, this whole film takes place essentially on one location, and it goes like night, day, and there's not really any real like, you know, rhyme or reason for like when these scenes happen. So the chronology of what I have might get a little bit mixed up. But the next day, Joyce is wondering about these noises, the piano being played, who else is here. There's the swamp doctor that comes to visit, and I think he's not familiar with Paul either, right?
Yeah, I guess I forgot the swamp doctor and the scientist are different characters. I was thinking they're the same one.
That's where I was so confused. But then I went back to the notes and we're just establishing that whether that's true or not. The swamp doctor is a scientist, so she meets the scientist guy, and he puts up a front. He's never heard of Paul, does not know who he is, but is overall generally more friendly than Lavinia is. And I think he does say something in particular that hints to Joyce that like everyone's kind of lying about not knowing who Paul is, not knowing who his house is. So Joyce confronts Lavinia and demands to know what happened to Paul. They know who Paul is, and she needs to get to the bottom of this. So Lavinia, who's been like this super angry, intimidating woman throughout, just breaks down in tears and says that Paul is her son.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know much about Joyce and Lavinia's relationship after that, because after that they seem to be kind of okay with each other throughout the rest of the film, but it just fades out and we never fully get more of that conversation. Joyce sees the figure again, and I believe at this point the figure, it's been revealed, has been Paul.
Amazing makeup on him.
That's what I was going to say.
Scaly reptile look on his face. It looks really good, I think.
Yeah, we don't know the full details about what happened to him, but all we know is that Paul is covered in these scales and this very alligator-like exterior skin.
Yeah, genuinely good makeup. Like, not just for a B movie. I think this looks just genuinely good.
Genuinely good makeup. I was going to say the same thing. That unfortunately is undercut by him doing a frog voice throughout.
Yeah, what was that? That was kind of interesting.
I don't know. It sounds like, do you know the character actor Eugene Pallett?
Not that I'm aware of.
He's a comedy guy. He appeared in a few musicals and Ernst Lubitsch films, and he has almost the exact same voice.
I would also compare him to I don't know if you're a big sports fan, Kevin, but there's he was an LSU football coach named Ed Orgeron, I think, or I always have trouble saying the name, but he was like a Cajun guy, and I remember he sounded really funny. He I remember my brother said he sounded like the Cookie Monster when he talked, but yeah, that's almost like I think he's trying to do a reptile thing, but it kind of reminded me of like a Cajun accent in some ways too, in a weird way. Probably unintentional, but
that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Because Lon Chaney Jr. talks weird, too.
Well, Lon Chaney Jr., I can imagine he's trying to do a Cajun accent.
I think he pulls that off pretty well. It's for like, Lon Chaney Jr.
Yeah, he does he pulls that off pretty well. But this guy, Richard Crane, there's no other way to say it except he sounds like a frog voice, like rah, 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 rah.
Yeah. Well, there is another way to say it. It's to say that he sounds like a Cookie Monster, but yes.
That's true, yeah. Well, I think it's like it's deeper than the Cookie Monster.
Sure.
And there's one line in particular, I put it in my notes, where just because of the way he said it, I cracked up laughing. I think it's when he's talking to Lavinia and is expressing like how much they need to keep this from Joyce because he doesn't want Joyce to know about what's going on. He says, "I love you. I love her, mother." Should be a very, like heartfelt moment where it's like he doesn't know what he's supposed to do because it's his wife and he loves her so much, but he says it in this like deep frog, raspy, and like almost muffled a little bit too. Like he can't say words very clearly with his makeup on.
Right, yeah.
So there's really great makeup that is unfortunately totally undercut by him doing a silly voice every time he has to talk.
It's also undercut by eventually the full monster reveal is absurd.
Absolutely. Well, we will definitely have to get to that because that's when the movie really turns into something beautiful. As Robert Bresson would say, not beautiful images, but necessary images.
Okay. Well, that's what you come to a movie called The Alligator People to see, really. I mean,
exactly. You're here for the necessary things, the images that are important and you'll take with you forever. So essentially, Joyce sees Paul again wandering around the property and follows him out into the swamp where Paul is trying to escape from her, essentially. And she walks past a number of alligators, and there's a giant snake, and it is pouring down rain, and she gets rescued in the middle of all this by Lon Chaney Jr., who takes her back to his shack and really tries to press her about taking off her clothes so she can get warm. And then, when she refuses, he wraps her up in a blanket and then immediately tries to assault her.
yeah.
Because, if it wasn't already established by the fact that he kills alligators for fun at night, Lon Chaney Jr. in this movie is just a very bad guy. And at one point, in the middle of all this, Paul, who's half alligator man at this point, walks in and knocks Lon Chaney Jr. out. Like, just gives him a really bad punch in the jaw. Knocks him out cold.
When I think alligators, I think punches.
Exactly. That's their preferred method of attack.
That's what I always get a kick out of some of the old Godzilla movies when Godzilla's like fighting.
Yeah.
It's like, for some reason, he just resorts to boxing half the time. It's like he's a giant dragon. Why is he just punching?
I would love to see a scientifically accurate Godzilla movie where a giant lizard attacks a city but behaves like a giant lizard would.
Well, that's what Shin Godzilla is, pretty much.
Oh, I haven't seen that one yet. I've heard good things about it, though. So at the house, she's being taken care of for when she wakes up. Meanwhile, Paul, who we now know the full details of, is pressing the scientist to give him an untested treatment, which basically revolves around pumping him full of radiation until, he becomes human again, or the alligator parts.
At least Kira's voice, please.
The doctor agrees to give him the treatment, and everyone decides that they can't keep all of this a secret from Joyce anymore. So the next morning, the doctor reveals to Joyce that the treatments and the experiments he's been taking out revolve around injecting humans with reptilian hormones, because these hormones are capable of regenerating limbs. So when people are injured in accidents and car crashes or plane crashes, as in the case of Paul, they're able to recover. However, everyone except Paul has begun to take on these reptilian traits and start to morph into these half alligator people, pretty much.
Sure.
We don't really see very many other people in this laboratory. We see one other man who's suffering from the same thing Paul does, but that's it. I think most of his other experiments died. They just...
Yeah, I guess so. That seems right.
Yeah.
Well, having a mix of warm and cold blood, having lukewarm blood, I can't imagine that's good for life expectancy.
So, Paul was the last of his patients to show any sign of reptilian traits, but when he got a test back, they said that it turned out positive and he was going to slowly evolve into a half alligator man. So they sent the telegram to him while he was leaving for his honeymoon with Joyce, and that is what led him to come to the house so that hopefully he can be cured and eventually, be reunited with his wife again. Which I gotta say, kind of a shitty thing to do as a husband. Just leave without a trace. And even if you were hoping for a cure, but you didn't want your wife to know everything, at least say something to her.
Yeah, make up a story.
Yeah, or
I got drafted to go fight with Elvis in Germany in 1959. Sure.
Yeah, something like that, rather than just leaving without a trace and not sending
and scrubbing your records somehow.
Exactly.
To the point where she could only find him through LSU, I guess.
I gotta say, Joyce can do better. And judging from her life that we see in the framing device as this new character,
yeah,
Jane,
she eventually did do better.
Yeah,
she's a nurse.
She seems great. I mean, she's repressing all these memories of a traumatic thing that happened to her, but
that can be a healthy thing. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. With the decision that they're going to go through with this treatment of pumping Paul full of radiation and cobalt until he becomes human again. So they're going to be present. And before the treatment starts that evening, There is a great scene where the doctor makes sure to stress very intently that even the slightest bit over or under on this radiation could have drastic consequences for Paul, and who knows what could happen. As you can imagine, something drastic does happen. Because when they start the radiation treatment, which, by the way, I love the laboratory set in this movie because you have, like, the futuristic, sciencey laser device that's pumping the radiation full. And then you have the wallpaper from, like, the suburban 1950s house in the corner of the lab. It's beautiful. But when the laser starts pumping Paul full of radiation, Lon Chaney Jr. runs into the house in a drunken rage and bursts into the lab and decides to just lay waste to everything. Just destroys everything, runs into the machine. It starts smoking and burning. The laser keeps pumping Paul full of radiation. And when Lon Chaney breaks into the lab so he can finally get revenge on Paul, what do you know? Paul has officially turned into an alligator man.
Yeah, he's got a snout.
Yeah, he's got a snout.
He's got a mask on.
He's got the full alligator head on a bipedal human-type body, but his entire body is now covered in scales. Mm-hmm. So he's even more alligator than man, I would argue, by this point. He doesn't have a voice anymore. He just has like a alligator like growl or whatever.
They call it a bellow with alligators.
Bellow. Oh, interesting. I never knew that.
Listen, I love reptiles, so I know I know a surprising amount about alligators and snakes and stuff like that. Yeah.
The look of the alligator here this is exactly what you go to B movies for. You know, this is just like pure bliss, like a guy in a super cheap costume who, after he kills Lon Chaney Jr., or maybe Lon Chaney Jr. just dies on his own, because I remember he gets caught in cords and like gets electrocuted. So
he gets electrocuted.
Yeah, so I don't even know if that's something Paul does on his own.
He gets the assist.
So he tries to, like, talk to Lavinia and to Joyce, but he can't talk anymore. He sounds like an alligator. So they scream because they're so terrified of what they see, and he is so embarrassed that he runs away and flees into the swamp. And when Joyce chases after him, the entire house explodes because the machine has short-circuited. There's radiation, there's all that stuff just leaking into the atmosphere. So everyone else is dead by this point except Joyce and Paul. And when Paul runs into the swamp, he starts to fight an alligator. I wasn't sure if I missed anything here. Like, I don't know why he's fighting the alligator, but he wins. He defeats it. Joyce is still trying to chase after him, but then, what do you know? Paul gets into some quicksand.
Has any natural phenomena wrapped up movies quicker than quicksand? You know what I mean? That's just like the Christopher Lee Mummy movie. It's just like, quicksand got him. And it's just...
There's a meme or a joke I saw online ages ago that I think about a lot when I see a movie like this, where someone made a comment that when I was a kid, I thought quicksand would be a lot more of a problem in my life than it really is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've seen the same thing. Yeah, because there's quicksand it appears all over media.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I don't think I've ever seen it once in real life. But it's not the kind of, as far as I know, it's not the kind of thing where it's like, it's not like the death knell that they show in these movies. I could be wrong, of course not. But it's insane. But that's what happens to Paul. He's in his cheap little alligator mask and sinks into quicksand as Joyce is screaming and crying for him. And I gotta say, Beverly Garland made a comment saying that the hardest thing about making this movie was keeping a straight face. She does a good job she does a good job throughout the whole thing, but with this scene in particular where she has to cry and is so upset that her husband is dying in front of her, but it's just a guy in a really cheap alligator suit. She does a good convincing job, I gotta say. That's the end of the story, and then it cuts back to the two psychiatrists who are listening to the tapes of her whole story again, and they're trying to decide whether or not they should tell her about what's going on, about what her past actually held. And so she, at that point, Joyce, who now goes by the name of Jane, comes into the office, and she just appears happy and content with where she's at in this life. So they make a decision not to tell her, and that's how the film ends, is just deciding to live in ignorant bliss.
Well, she doesn't even decide. They decide to force her to
they
live
decide.
it. Yeah. It's not her decision.
Yeah, of course. They decide it for her. They decide, like, yeah, she's better off not knowing.
Which is probably true.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at what she went through, and I'm just thinking about where she's at now. It's like, yeah, I mean, even if she did know, it's like she still would have to live with the knowledge that she married a guy who disappeared for months without telling her where he was.
Yeah, regardless of the alligator part, you're right.
So, what did you think of this film?
I enjoyed it. I don't know if I'm going to say more than I expected to, but I enjoyed it. I think, you're going into a movie called The Alligator People. You're expecting some B-movie charms, and we get those, and mostly in the last 10 minutes or so. But what kind of surprised me was the first hour or so and how kind of interesting it was. There was a lot more intrigue than I was expecting. When she's just trying to find out where her husband is.
Yeah.
Guy was actually engaged in the story. And then Lon Chaney Jr. is out there just shooting up some alligators. Like, that's awesome. Lon Chaney Jr. is probably my favorite part of the movie, other than maybe the alligator makeup.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I love both looks, but I'm saying in particular the makeup when it's still a human face.
Absolutely. I agree.
And they just make it look scaly, but I love the alligator mask for, like, schlock purposes, of course. But yeah, I enjoyed the movie. What about you?
I think it's a kind of like 50s B sci-fi movie that, like, you have to learn to take the good with the bad, or at least the boring. Like, on the one hand, you have Lon Chaney's performance, which is great. You have Beverly Garland, who I really like a lot. You have the original alligator makeup, which is good and interesting. And then you have the alligator mask, which is fun in, like, a schlocky kind of way. But that's still some kind of entertainment. But then there's still, like, some parts here and there that are just, long, rather boring stretches of not too much happening.
I didn't find it that boring. I understand what you mean, but I guess maybe in comparison to other, like, not even B movies, but like 50s sci-fi, there's usually long, boring stretches. I didn't think this movie had that the way some other movies do.
Well, it is short. I think that's one of the best things that it has going for it.
But most of those movies are, though,
yeah.
too.
I don't know. I mean, I've been super busy with stuff right now, so it's possible just I have a million things on my mind as I'm watching movies these days. Or maybe I think the other issue is that when Lon Chaney Jr. isn't on the screen, or when Beverly Garland isn't on the screen, I'm not as taken by the performances of some of the other people, especially the performance of Paul.
I would agree with that.
And so when scenes focus on Paul and his sort of dramatic arc, it's not as effective. It's kind of like the old Poochie argument, where it's like when characters aren't on screen, when Beverly Garland or Lon Chaney aren't on screen, we should just be asking, where's Lon Chaney?
Sure. One thing I would like to stress too that I enjoyed that we didn't talk about too much was the use of actual alligators, with the exception of the scene where they may or may not have run one over and killed it.
Yeah.
I like that this movie actually featured a lot of real alligators, and alligators are just awesome creatures to me. They're just neat. They're big. They're scary. Their bellow is terrifying.
Yeah.
Even when Lon Chaney Jr. is shooting at him, you see real alligators. Like, that to me is neat. And,
yeah.
They had people, like, interacting with the gators to the point where it's like, oh, this is dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. So that's, like, kind of impressive.
Yeah, I think as far as these 50s sci-fi B movies go, like, you could do a lot worse than this for sure.
Sure.
And I think that there's
you could watch The Angry Red Planet, which we did earlier this season, which is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. Oh, I don't know if it's that bad, but it was bad.
I'll definitely check it out. I'll check it out one of these days, but I'm not gonna, I wasn't gonna rush out to watch it anyways, but I'll keep your anti-recommendation in mind.
Okay. All right. So, Kevin, which of these two movies do you prefer? Martin or The Alligator People?
I think Alligator People I would put on more often just to have playing in the background, but there's no doubt that Martin's the better movie. Mm-hmm. Like, I love the atmosphere of 50s sci-fi in general.
I do too, yeah.
Yeah, but no question that Marvin is like a genuinely great movie.
Yeah, for me this is an easy one. Martin demands a lot out of you, I think, as a viewer, because it's slow, and it's more so than being slow. It's just like depressing and sad.
Yeah.
But sometimes you want to watch movies like that. Like, I always joke that my favorite comedies are just really, really depressing comedies. Like, I love the Alexander Payne movies. Like, I could watch Sideways any day. That's like an incredibly depressing movie, and I love it. And so Martin is the comedy, or he's not the comedy. Martin is the horror version of Alexander Payne to me, so I appreciate it.
Interesting way to look at it, but I can see what you mean. You always like to see if these would make a good double feature, right?
Yeah, that's one of our gimmicks, sure. What do you think?
Well, no, first off, but I did think there was one thing that I could find one connection between these two, and that is that they both have, like, kind of fatalistic endings. Like, the endings for both of these films are kind of predicated on stuff that the protagonists didn't do. Like, Martin, you have Kuda killing Martin,
blaming him for Abby's death.
Yeah, blaming him for a death that wasn't hidden. And in this one, you have Lon Chaney barging into the laboratory to destroy the whole thing. And that also just causes his death, but without any regard for, like, the rest of the characters. Like, it's not based on, like, motivated on, like, the main characters. It's just something that we...
To be fair, do we think the alligator thing could have been reversed if Lon Chaney Jr. didn't interrupt it? I think it was.
I think the whole thing was kind of doomed from the get-go. But,
exactly. But if you want to blame Lon Chaney,
he certainly didn't help. And honestly, the fact that Paul survived, even being turned into a man with the head of an alligator, and is still a living creature,
kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of a scientific miracle. Wish that scientist had survived. Who knows what other things he could have come up with.
Well, I'll agree. It's not a good double feature. I think both movies are good individually, but I mean that's kind of an interesting commonality you found. I'll also say, like, if you're just like a big horror fan and you appreciate, like, kind of the history of horror films, you have a George Romero and you have a Lon Chaney Jr. picture. You know, there's like two heavy hitters, you know, in the genre, but that's really all I got. I guess there's sexual violence in both films. Lon Chaney Jr. or Martin himself.
Yeah,
right?
But that I wouldn't go. I would hope that anyone listening to this is not looking to make a double feature of films that feature sexual violence.
Double feature, of course not. Yeah, watching Irreversible and what's the I can't think of the other. Well, I guess just pick your rape revenge movie.
Exactly. I Spit on Your Grave or something.
Yeah, I couldn't think of that name.
They Call Her One Eye. God.
Oh, that one I really want to see.
I still haven't seen it, actually.
I really want to see. What's the other title it goes by?
Thriller, A Cruel Picture.
Yeah, A Cruel Picture.
Which is a great title. An all-timer title right there.
So, thank you, Kevin, for joining me, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Be sure to check out our Patreon for extended cuts of episodes, as well as access to commentary tracks. As for our next episode, it is going to be on The Big Boss, starring Bruce Lee, and Mandy, starring Nicolas Cage, which that movie's always on Shudder, so I think you'll be able to see it. And yeah, thanks for joining us, and we hope to catch you next time.